Welcome to NFL Daily, where we would never request a trade out of the Chris Wesseling podcast studio.
Never.
I'm here talking about a lot of news. It's happening, Patrick Claybon. We're doing it.
We're doing it. And I love there's a distinction between requesting a trade, because that's when people report that somebody requests a trade, and then there's the secondary, somebody has formally requested a trade, which I always wonder, does that involve papyrus? Like, is there a quill in this process? But I love it. I love it no matter what.
Just like someone delivering a handwritten letter. I would
you
appreciate that.
Are you John Schneider? Yes, you're served.
Yeah, spoiler alert, it's DK Metcalf talk at the top of this podcast. So I'm here with Patrick, and when I'm saying like we're doing it, it's happening. The free agency frenzy, I feel like it starts earlier and earlier every year. It started to bubble up more. Tuesday was a pretty busy day. Wednesday, we got even more news, including this DK Metcalf trade request, which was not a shock, but a surprise, I would say, that it's out there in the sense that the Seahawks seem very open to it, and we'll get into that in a second. And then later in the show, we're going to listen to myself and Ollie Connolly, one of the best minds in the business, and we're going to go through the free agency list, and we're just going to talk about guys we'd want on our team, guys that we would want to sign. So it's a packed show. And
it's ahead of all of this, ahead of the frenzy, to get everybody a chance to evaluate, as long as, again, you have a representative to call and discuss with teams, because if you want to do it yourself, that's tampering, and that's bad. So players, we're sorry, but fans and people who have representation, this is the podcast.
That's a great point. That it is a little favored to the people that have the agents early. I have been having to update my top 101. Now DK Metcalf is not going to be there, but one of his teammates might be Tyler Lockett. Let's start, though, with the DK Metcalf news, but I wanted to mention that the Seahawks are releasing Tyler Lockett because I think these things can be talked about in tandem, because suddenly, if they're both not on the team, that's a totally different Seahawks offense. So the DK Metcalf trade request report comes in. He reportedly prefers to be dealt to a contending team, which who amongst us would not? The compelling part of it is A, that it's so formal, and that B, that the Seahawks are letting him explore those options. Let's start with just, do you think this deal ends up happening?
Well, the letting explore thing, I truly think we've seen it, right, with Matthew Stafford, where there already is a relationship, and you're able to go out and determine what your value is, what the circumstances can be. And so much of this, especially when we're evaluating players at positions that get tagged as mercurial or whatever, and DK plays wide receiver, and the conversation is about, is this person happy? Well, it gives him a chance to say, what's the market? What could these particular situations be? And if the situation is better here in Seattle with Geno, then perhaps it is, but it at least gives him an opportunity to get that information, as well as the Seahawks a chance to get information about how other teams view DK.
Right. And similar to Stafford, but not quite the same, the contract is a big part of it. So DK has $18 million in base salary this season, which is a good bargain. $4 million option bonus. The cap number is quite higher because they had pushed out that he is already on his second contract. And this would naturally be the off season where he would be looking for a third contract. Now, if he has the feeling, and maybe there were conversations with the Seahawks, that's not happening in Seattle, or it's not going to be at the level that he wants, then it actually is a logical time that these two sides would part ways, because Seattle could presumably get a better trade offer even maybe than Stafford was getting. He was a second-round pick. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a second-round pick, quote-unquote, but it'd be a good pick, and DK would make that premier wide receiver money not only a year earlier, but presumably it would be more elsewhere. I wrote down some potential landing spots, but I have to admit, after doing the exercise, it was harder to come up with the teams where DK Metcalf didn't make sense. Like, a lot of teams could use a number one wide receiver, and as I've been mentioning on the show, there's a lot of cap space out there. Half the league has almost $50 million in cap space. More than half has $40 million. So a lot of teams could fit DK Metcalf in. Who stuck out to you? Which teams as potential landing spots?
Well, we've discussed, right, the Green Bay Packers and their need for having an actual number one.
There's been reports that those conversations have already happened, although they've been dismissed by different people, but that's been out there that could be a thing.
And again, the teams with space and with a need at the spot, right? You've got a Denver Broncos team that I think services, as you mentioned, Greg, like the number of teams that would be out, right? Because I'm also thinking about the Indianapolis Colts with their $34 million in cap space, where it's easy to see, well, hey, DK playing primarily on the outside and being a big target, is that one where there's only 14 or 15 of these guys on planet Earth. And so it will behoove almost everybody, if they have the money to do it, to take a shot at getting him.
Broncos would make sense, and yet they didn't even make my list. Like, he wants to go to a contending team. We'll see how much he can control the process. The Patriots were interested in him and Brandon Ayuk a year ago. You would assume that they would be. They've got the most cap space. The Raiders would make some sense. Pete Carroll's there, certainly could use a wide receiver. Dave Canales was with DK Metcalf, so I try to make the connections. The Carolina Panthers could certainly use a number one wide receiver. Some of the contending teams that I think could maybe find room for him, maybe the Chiefs, if they wanted to get a little crazy. They did open up some room today. Maybe the Ravens. Would they be willing to give long-term money? I could just see him in a Ravens uniform. They love the big physical type players. Who wouldn't love DK Metcalf? The Bills might be a little tough, but you wouldn't totally shock me. The Giants, could the Dolphins get involved with like a Tyreek swap? I mean, the options are endless. I'm going to answer my own question from before. I didn't tend to think this is going to happen because I do think there will be a good market for him. And I could be wrong, but I don't think it's getting out there in such a way. And John Schneider was evasive when asked about DK Metcalf last week, if they already weren't somewhat on board with this and open to it. I don't like the idea from the Seahawks perspective.
No, from the Seahawks perspective, it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense unless, of course, you've already made the decision down the road and you're honest with DK about it, that this third contract is not coming from Seattle. And so DK has an opportunity to see, where is that third contract coming from, or is it better to play this year in Seattle and then try to procure that contract, right?
Okay, so but you get rid of DK and you cut Tyler Lockett.
Like within an hour, we found out about essentially the Seahawks receiving core non-JSN.
Shout out to Tyler Lockett, one of the best team runs of the last decade. Just kind of the classic Seahawks fans know how much he meant to them in a way that maybe the national media didn't. He arrived there in 2015. Immediately as a contributor, always one of the more underrated players. I think eventually people caught up to what a great route runner he is. Smaller, 33, coming off a 600-yard season. I didn't put him in the top 101. Should I feel bad about that? I don't know.
I don't know if you should feel bad about it.
Yeah, I don't know.
In terms of like evaluating age being a factor, the fall off of last season, and kind of it comes along with the ascension of Jackson Smith and Jigba, where, maybe if the targets are there, Tyler Lockett, has a season where he gets into the 101.
Right. He's a guy who almost immediately goes down after catching the ball because he's trying to avoid contact, which, Marvin Harrison did his whole career and went to the Hall of Fame that way. It's one of the reasons why Tyler Lockett, who people thought was too undersized to play, is still playing every game at his age, but not a yak guy. And yeah, if they trade DK Metcalf, it's Jake Bobo as your number 2 receiver right now. And I don't even know who's number 3. They don't even have a number 3. I kind of like Jake Bobo. I think
Jake Bobo's nice, but nice when viewed alongside DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yes, I think he fits as a 3 or a 4 in a 4-man rotation. I think he is due like a step up, a chance to be a red zone type of guy. So that's just 2 receivers. Lot to watch there. I'm curious where Lockett will go. Maybe he'll go to some of those teams I mentioned, which with Seattle connections, Carolina or Las Vegas. I thought we were going to be leading the show with a big surprising trade. Joe Thuney is going to the Bears for a 2026 4th-round pick, 2-time All-Pro, including this year. Hell, he got Offensive Player of the Year votes from his ex-teammates that are in the media. I don't know about that. Rodney and Tom Brady. Let's take away those votes. 4-time Super Bowl champion between the Patriots and the Chiefs. Football's cruel, though, because, he's compensated well and everything, but ultimately his end in Kansas City was getting steamrolled in the Super Bowl as your team got steamrolled in the Super Bowl. He did individually, had a rough game, and then you get traded. Who knows if he knew this was coming or not? It's a bit of a shock to the system for a really great player who's going to have a Hall of Fame resume at some point. And I actually think this is a win-win for both sides, as much as it sounds crazy for it to be a win for the Chiefs. What do you think?
No, it's definitely a win for Joe Thuney because let's be honest, you talk about the way things ended. He got moved around and put in that spot.
Right. It wasn't his fault. He was playing well at guard. He was playing well at guard.
And so, like, he gets essentially sent on a mission, and now it almost, with the trade, kind of could retroactively feel like blame. I don't know that's necessarily the case, but, maybe when all the dust settles, the Bears are going to end up with 2 members of the Chiefs' offensive line after this, get free agency and get Trey Smith a spot.
What, in a trade? They're going to get him too?
No, just go ahead and just make it happen. Why not? But essentially, right, it makes sense for the Bears and it makes sense for Joe Thuney. And, if the Chiefs can keep this thing going with continuing to shuffle spots on the offensive line, I'm not as confident as I would have been.
Well, Thuney's not that old either. He's 32, which, for a guard is... You still have good years left. He hasn't really shown any decline at guard. And I think it was a little bit of a sign of someone who wasn't necessarily watching when they were giving Thuney a lot of pop for how he played at left tackle, because he was one of their biggest issues. Their entire line was an issue. But essentially they chose to keep Trey Smith, and you can't keep everyone. And they chose Trey Smith, who's 5 years younger, over Joe Thuney, and that makes sense. Bill Barnwell, shout out to him on our Trades to Watch podcast, Eric. We gotta keep track of how many of these players get traded. He had Joe Thuney, and I thought he had a little too much dip on his chip for that one. Like, he just threw that out there out of nowhere. There was no buzz about this possibly happening, but he put the pieces together, and he said he's 1 year away from his contract ending. They're probably not going to be able to afford Joe Thuney and Trey Smith in a year. So if you want to keep Trey Smith, then maybe you try to get something for Joe Thuney now, and you make that choice. And that's exactly what they did. So good job by Bill, kind of sleuthing that together. I didn't see.
If you're listening to NFL Daily regularly, we also had Ryan Poles on, and he told you that they're ready to start spending on the offensive line. Connect the dots. NFL Daily.
Breaking the news.
Of all this.
And of course, if you missed it, Jonah Jackson was traded from the Rams to the Bears on Tuesday. Seems like a long time ago now. So they have 2 guard spots now taken up. They still need to fill their center spot. And it's crazy. They actually probably could draft a guard too, because Thuney's on the last year of his contract. Maybe you want to extend him, but Jonah Jackson, who knows what's going to happen with him? Like, you need to have some young players there too.
So if you want to chart the Bears offseason, there is a before Gregg had a conversation with Ryan Poles, and then there's an after Gregg had a conversation with Ryan Poles, and the offensive line is significantly better. There's no disagreeing with that, correct?
Let's go. And for all the Chiefs fans that are upset, you only got a fourth. You only got a fourth because no one in the league was willing to give up more than a fourth. I actually think it's a sign that they would have considered cutting Joe Thuney if they got nothing for him, because they reportedly want to spend some money at wide receiver. There's other spots in the roster that they want to spend, and that they just ultimately chose a couple of people, Trey Smith and Travis Kelce. Now that's where the sentiment comes in. Joe Thuney, he got that first Super Bowl with the Patriots. And so, they're loyal to Travis Kelce. If you were asking me which one would provide more value in 2025, I might make the case for Joe Thuney.
Wow.
But you're never going to get rid of Travis Kelce. So you keep him at a big salary.
That was pretty hot, Greg.
Is it?
This feels spicy.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the last thing that's in your mind, which Travis Kelce struggling really in that playoff run in general, but especially in the Super Bowl. All right, let's stick in the division. Maxx Crosby gets another extension. How this guy just keeps getting extensions. 3 years, $106 million, $91 million guaranteed. The Raiders also signed Alex Kappa on Wednesday. Alex Kappa was just released earlier this week by the Bengals. He has a history with their new GM, also a guest of NFL Daily, John Spytek, who said they would be intelligently aggressive, I believe, at quarterback.
Love it.
They haven't gotten their quarterback yet, but they did get Alex Kappa, who is with him in Tampa. Tough player. But yeah, Crosby is now the highest paid non-quarterback ever. pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool, especially looking over at the situation in Cleveland where a guy who's going to Canton one day has decided he no longer wants to be a part of things. Things have been very frustrating for Maxx in Las Vegas. So yeah, go ahead and get this done. Secure a long-term partnership and make it happen.
And I do want to mention, if I sound a little nervous today, it's because the Girl Scouts of America are here and they're watching the show. We have an audience and they have a new studio. They're learning how the studio is working, so that if I'm a little tight, but everyone go buy your Girl Scout cookies.
Absolutely.
Out there. And good luck with all your work at the new studio as we wave goodbye to the representatives of the Girl Scouts of America. You never know what's going to happen at NFL Media.
NFL Daily is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
A couple releases that dropped on Wednesday. Christian Kirk. Big-time free agent signing a couple years ago. People were all up in arms. Remember, it was like, how could you pay
so much
Christian
money.
Kirk $17 million a year? And all these deals end up looking okay in the long run. Not only did he play well the first year, he got, I think, 1,100 yards, but $17 million quickly didn't look like nearly as much for a receiver. Now, that said, he wasn't due that much more than that this year, and it totally made sense, I think, from their perspective. They're saving over $10 million against the cap because he just couldn't stay healthy the last couple of years. He had a broken collarbone. He had a muscle core injury the year before, and it's a new regime. These things happen with a new regime. But unlike Tyler Lockett, he is on my top 101. He's in my top 50. I think Christian Kirk can help your team. He's about 46.
Clear difference, no Christian Kirk with Christian Kirk for the Jags throughout his entire tenure, including when he was coming back from that core muscle injury where they got banged up and there really wasn't a replacement for it. Despite the ascension of BTJ, right, there still wasn't that Christian Kirk value in the offense.
Like, he's a little straight line and he's not a number one receiver, but he can give you pop running down the seams. Definitely kept his speed there in Jacksonville. A broken collarbone is not an injury you want to suffer, but also is an injury that's not going to affect your speed, and that's something people come back from, and they're basically all the way back. And so I think he's going to be an attractive option for maybe if the Ravens weren't going as high as DK, maybe a Christian Kirk to throw in the mix. Like, he'd be a perfect, whether he's a 2, whether he's a 3. To me, wide receiver rooms are now their rotations. He's obviously not the 1, but he fits in a 3 to 4, 2 to 4 rotation as a quality player.
Yeah, just in terms of getting talent on the field, and he's not hurting you. Like, his numbers against press, ability to play out wide or in the slot, right, where the majority of the snaps coming in the ladder there. But still, like, he can do it, and he got tape out to do it. So, yeah, he can contribute in a lot of places.
A week 1 starting quarterback was released on Wednesday. Gardner Minshew. Kind of forgot he was still on the Raiders. He's not been a free agent. He was released. They had to guarantee some of that money into the second year, so they are eating some of that guaranteed money, but ultimately they don't see him even as a potential backup with the team, so he is out. He's not on my 101, and yet if your team signs him to be your backup, depending on the situation with your starter, he's a very good backup or a good enough backup, so Minshew will continue to get work and get checks. Sam Hubbard retired. I expected him to be cut this offseason just because he just has not been the same player. Unfortunately, suffered a really serious injury on a touchdown. I can't think of a career ending this way. A defensive player catches a touchdown from his buddy Joe Burrow. They're very close. Hubbard's a local guy, by the way, Ohio guy, and he's decided to retire. I think he's only 28 years old, so happy trail to Sam Hubbard.
Yeah, a nice career where they came very close to accomplishing that ultimate goal, and you highlighted it with the touchdown. He's done a lot in this league, and why go past the expiration? Congratulations.
Yeah, he had a few different things. It was a PCL injury. Anyhow, Hubbard had gotten a big second contract from Mike Brown and them. If they don't bring back Trey Hendrickson this year, like, we'll see. They are starting over at that position. We learned on Wednesday that Tank Dell was having ACL surgery, and I just thought that was notable because just thinking about a timeline for him to return. We're going to talk AFC South on our next show, Patrick, and they're going to need wide receivers because if he's only having this surgery on Wednesday, after having another surgery. I think it was on his PCL 6 weeks ago. Then it's going to be a long recovery. The Texans also re-signed Dare Ogunbowale, their versatile fullback, running back. Maxx Crosby, the longtime Packers kicker, retired. Happy trails to him. Joel Bitonio is returning to the Browns, so that's good news for them. He is not going to retire. Zach Martin had his official retirement. He's going into the Ring of Honor. And Dak and CD both restructured their contracts. And voila, the Cowboys opened up $37 million in cap space.
They did it.
See, the cap's not real.
Yeah, no, it's all, it's all relative. And so congratulations to Jerry Jones and the Cowboys. Now they can be all in, Greg. So
they're not, though.
They're going to take that money and they're going to spend it on players now, right?
He said that he wouldn't use the word aggressive to describe how they were going to be. So we'll see. Cowboys now have $54 million in cap space. I'm tracking this. When we get to the point where half the league has $50 million, that is just an unprecedented amount of cap space. I would like the research group to go back and check, because over half has at least $46 million. It's too much money. It's not too much money, but I'm curious how they're all going to find ways to spend it.
When half the league has $57 million, perhaps that's a good time to tell your team that you would like to seek options regarding a trade.
That's a very good point. There are a lot of teams that can make this thing happen with other teams' players and their own players. We're going to take a quick break, but I do want to mention as a preface, Ollie Connolly and I talked about guys we would want to sign in free agency. Part of the reason I wanted Ollie Connolly on the podcast was because he had Zach Bond as his Defensive Player of the Year. I thought he spoke and wrote very eloquently about how and why Zach Bond was so important to the Eagles defense, was really the linchpin, brought it all together, that Vic Fangio was not going to let this guy leave the building. That informed my own analysis, and I wanted to hear it, straight from the horse's mouth. We taped that before Zach Bond signed a 3-year deal for $51 million with 34 guaranteed. He is the 4th highest paid off-ball linebacker in the league. Hell, I think the Eagles got a pretty good deal considering how great he was, but I understand him wanting to stay in Philadelphia where he was so productive. And what a come up, what a story of development. Zach Bond has been going from an afterthought in New Orleans to one of the best off-ball linebackers in the league. I wanted to leave the start of the segment. We said free agents we wanted to sign, and the first one that came out of Ollie's mouth was Zach Bond. So that is going to start our conversation, which will start after the break. And I think that part of it will inform you to the reason why Zach Bond is worth all that cheddar. Thank you, Patrick, for your contributions to today's program. But you'll be back later this week.
Thank you, Greg.